Now going into clause 6, still in the planning phase. This is the specific area around planning. So this is not a demonstration of the risks that you have assessed. Basically, this is looking at how you go about doing it. So it's the method you used in terms of looking at risks and opportunities and hazards, and also aspects of environmental aspects and their impact as well. What you have to do in terms of your compliance obligations. So obviously in the planning phase, you need to understand and determine your legal requirements and your compliance obligations for the industry you work in, the products or services you provide, and also planning to take action. So what actions do you have to take associated to that, and your objectives and how you're going to achieve them. So we've got these objectives that are set back in the context, leadership are supporting them. Now in this planning phase, it's about, well, let's look at how we're going to achieve them, what are we going to put in place, and then lastly, it's about all organisations go through a change, whatever that may be. This area is looking at, well, what methods do we use to plan our changes well, so that when a change occurs, we're not sort of scratching our head thinking, well, or when a plan change happens, what do we do in this situation? So it's understanding, well, we have a method of change management, for example, and this is how it's done. So actions to address risks and opportunities. So what we want to do in this case, like I said before, is prevent or reduce undesired effects and look to achieve continual improvement. So in terms of the planning phase for risks and opportunities, we want to be looking at, well, do we have in place an effective system that demonstrates how these risks are measured and how we identify them against opportunities, and are they proportionate to the potential impact in the business? So we think about a risk-based approach to our management system. This is a fundamental area where we want to look at, well, what's the method we are using to address risk? One of the experiences I've had is people sometimes within organisations believe the area they work in is the most important. It's the most relevant to the business and potentially can have the greatest risk if it's not done really well. But actually it needs a slightly different approach to business risks and addressing risks and opportunities, so that it has a group sort of look at it to try and decide what areas have the greatest impact. And you can't do that by just sort of sticking your finger in the air and having a guess at it. You really have to go through the process of assessing it and using others to help with that assessment. In terms of the effects of uncertainty, so remember, from a quality point of view, it's the risks are associated to the uncertainty and what it is that you're trying to achieve. So what could happen? How likely is it to happen? And what effect will it have if it does happen? And this is the uncertainty aspect. So if we do not deliver those parts on time, if we cannot produce that, if we cannot fix the item out on site, okay? So these are all associated to that. It's a slightly different mindset to environmental and health and safety risks, because that's very focused on people and the environment. I'm not sure I would say easier, but it's certainly more defined. When we look at it from a quality point of view, there can often be a lot more thought has to go into the uncertainty of things not meeting their requirements. So what's the likelihood of achieving our stated objectives? Is it consistent with what we're expecting, and is it going down the approach of trying to achieve what our customer and internal goals might be? So as I said before, successful companies intuitively take a risk-based approach regardless of the areas that they're working in. So within the planning, remember I said we have to think about our compliance obligations, okay? So we have to identify and have access to what our compliance obligations are. So whether that be that we have someone in our organisation that recognises and has the education and knowledge and competence to be able to identify what our compliance requirements are, or whether we use external source consulting or whatever that may be. So the key method here is we have to identify. So this is an important first step of making sure that we know all our legal requirements, all that are applicable to us as a business. And they can originate local, regional, or national, or even international, depending on where we work and the activities we do. And if we don't know that a specific item of legislation exists, how are we going to actually find that out? What's our method of using it, of identifying it? And important, when we identify legislation, we have to again look at how it is applicable to our business. Okay? Does it actually apply to us? Are we just throwing that in there because we see it's a legal requirement? How applicable is it to our business? Obviously, there's a whole bunch of legal requirements that, as an organisation employing people, we have to comply with. What we're really referring to much more here is about specifically the ones associated to what we are working in, the business we are working in, and the industries that we are working in. And we'll go into that a little bit later. This is just the planning element of it in terms of how we go about identifying what those are. And we spoke again about objectives and how we're going to achieve them. So taking our objectives from the context, the high level, what's expected, the commitment from the leadership team and what that's going to be and how they're going to resource it, let's say. Then it's about, well, how do we plan to achieve them? So we want to reduce our scrap by 20%. We want to reduce our recalls. We want to deliver our projects on time, whatever these might be. So how is it we're going to plan to achieve that? So we might want to break it down month on month. So we might say we're going to try and have an improvement of 1 to 2% month on month. And that 1 to 2% is going to be focused in these areas because these are the areas that we had the greatest issues in. And when you're planning these areas, it's important that you can show that they can be timeline bound, that they are measurable, and you can evaluate the information. And again, that's an area that you can clearly internally audit against, so that you can see, right, these are the objectives that we plan to set for an end of year or a 3-year or a 5-year goal. This is how we were planning to do it, and these are the resources and commitment that we had. How are we measuring them, and how well is that going? And auditing against that is a way of being able to throw up any issues or showing how we are in terms of being targeted for achieving what we want to achieve. Objectives is one of the biggest areas I think that we hear about in terms of organisations not quite understanding what it means. And we often see companies that put exactly the same objective in their management system or against their business plans and objectives year on year, thinking that these have to be specific to health and safety or specific to quality or whatever that may be. I think business should look at these as an overall objective. Where are the areas of weakness in our business? Where are the areas that we want to focus our improvement on, whether that be for financial, whether that be for efficiency, whether that be for improvement on our health and safety culture, waste control, etc., etc. So I think companies need to take a little bit less focus on their quality objectives, health and safety objectives, and look more as a general consensus of what it is that we want to try and do and why are we trying to do this? What's the purpose for a business that we want to try and improve our environmental impact? Is it simply because our external auditor says we have to demonstrate something, or is there other ways and means that we can demonstrate our objectives and how that they're going to be achieved? When we think about changes in a business, as I said before, changes are something that all businesses go through in one form or another. So we need to try and understand when we're planning for changes that we recognise that there's, I would say, almost a process approach to how it's done. So what's the purpose of the change, and what are any potential consequences if we do the change, and the consequences if we don't do the change? Does it have any impact on the integrity of our management system? Is there things we need to look at that could have an impact? Some of these changes could change our risks, and we may consider that. What about the availability of resources? So when we're planning for changes, are we considering the resources we need? And when we talk about resources, we talk about human, equipment, infrastructure, IT, etc., etc. And what about the allocation and reallocation of roles and responsibilities and authorities? I remember back in 2015 when there was the slump in the oil and gas industry. I remember working in an organisation at the time where it was an oil and gas operator, where they simply just took a broad brush stroke activity, which was to remove 25% of the workforce. Instead of taking an understanding around what impact that might have and how allocation and reallocation of jobs were, what actually happened at that time, I remember a number of departments and functions that where they had a low number of people working in them. Ultimately what happened was they couldn't remove 25%, so they effectively removed 50%. So if there was 2 people in the organisation, 1 left. There wasn't a real huge amount of interaction with the person that was left. It was simply a case of, you've still got your job, good for you, move on. Unfortunately, what I did experience was a number of people that were basically asked to do double the workload, or try and do double the workload. And if you kind of have a think about that in terms of what the potential impact would be, your management system and the purpose of being in business is to try and be successful. If these things happen and you're in control of it, then you can try and manage expectations, manage inconsistencies and errors. But if it's simply just a case of letting people get on with it, often other errors can occur. And often these decisions that are made can have significant influencing factors. So in terms of change, it is important that we recognise that change can bring about additional significant risk. And importantly, I think a big part of that is how it's managed and communicated. So what are we trying to achieve by this change? What are the consequences of doing it or not doing it? What resources do we require to put this change in place successfully? What effects will it have upon other staff and their roles? Do we understand what the impact might be? And could that change affect other areas? Could it bring about additional risks? Could it have an impact on other parts of the business that we need to understand? So remember, the whole purpose of this is not actually the results of management of change, but how we actually demonstrate how we will plan to do it. So a process approach is a good method of demonstrating how we plan to do changes. And of course, as part of an internal audit, it's very good example to be able to look at changes that have happened in your organisation and go back and audit the process that you went through. Did you follow the management of change process? Was it properly done? Are you able to demonstrate that? And then ultimately, as part of your changes, is how successful was it? My name's Chris from FQM. We'd appreciate it if you subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn.